Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the All In podcast with the jump off with Walt the Damager.
And I'm Rob the Jetta. What's going on, family?
What's going on? It's a somber moment. We just want to take a minute to give our condolences and well wishes to the Lewis family. We lost a great pioneer, an epic fighter for the civil rights of our people, John Robert Lewis, who passed on July 17th. An American politician, great civil rights leader. He also served in the House of Representatives for Georgia's 5th Congressional District from 87 until his death in 2020. Um, he had pancreatic cancer. I don't know if a lot of people knew that. And he also served as the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 63 to 66. So, like I said, at this time, just take a couple minutes and, give our condolences and well wishes to the family.
Yeah, absolutely. John Lewis was a great freedom fighter. As folks know, and you may recall, he started out as a very young man. Cody, I think he was your age when he was
Yeah, he was around my age.
in his 20s, when he was out in those streets as you guys are now, which I commend your generation. Standing next to Dr. Martin Luther King. I believe I heard a stat that he was arrested 45 times. Had a skull injury crossing the bridge in Selma, Alabama. But really, all that really to, see where we're at today in America, there were some real good dignitaries, at the funeral today, former presidents Bush, Clinton, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi were there. They all gave, outstanding remarks. And of course, the eulogy was done by President Obama. And President Obama, always he's an outstanding and inspirational speaker. But, it's one quote that, I took from it. And he said, "Today we witness with our own eyes police officers kneeling on the necks of Black Americans. George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators." That, wow. And I will say this, I'm 51 years old, and George Wallace was doing all these things before I was born. And here we are today, 51 years, later, we still seeing this same type of thing. So John, Brother John Lewis, your life and legacy, just thank you so much. And again, our condolences out to the Lewis family. We got a special guest, folks. We have Cody Santiago with us today. Cody, why don't you introduce yourself and we're not even calling you a guest today. We're going to call you a guest co-host. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, man. It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yes,
And I
sir.
appreciate you having me on. I really do. I've been watching your podcast grow and Eli's podcast grow. It's been great to see. It's a great means of communication. I love it. I'm just I like to think of myself as a community warrior. I like to try to do right by what communities would want, and a lot of people don't always agree with me. And that's fair. That's the country that we live in. But I've also been a servant in public safety in the fire service. I'm in emergency management now. I actually teach emergency management for a few different organizations. I just like helping people in any sense. It's always been a part of who I am. And so I'm excited to dive into some things that you got lined up for us today, for sure.
Absolutely, we're excited to have you on, and I'll tell you. And I don't know how far back on some of the podcasts that you heard, but we had one of our mentors, Malik Aziz, on, and I don't know if you know this, Cody, but Walt and I grew up together. So we grew up in the same neighborhood in Philadelphia, and of course, just like you had mentors and things like that. And Malik Aziz, we had him on talking about prison reform, and he was one of what we call back in the day one of our old heads, and he was one of our coaches, and he watched us grow, he groomed us, and it was interesting because on those podcasts he expressed how happy he was to see the growth in both Walt and I, as we matured through the years. And I can share that same thing. Although I didn't have the pleasure of coaching you, I had the great pleasure of watching you grow as a young sports athlete with primarily playing a lot with my sons, in all three sports. And one of the things that I noticed, I saw someone mature well above his years, and you could so we will always say is all those of us who play sports, we can see sports is always something. Sometimes you can see a person's character on how they play sports. And I always notice how you always played the game from the neck up. Never relied on athleticism, but from the neck up, and use your smarts and your wits to get you over in sports competition. And I see that now, just following you on social media, seeing how you attack this political lane. And I'm gonna come out here and say it, and folks, listening here, as you hear this young man, some of this young man's thoughts, you'll agree with me. I see a young politician, man, and when you're ready to run, man, just hire me for your campaign manager.
You know what? I get that. You know what, Robin? First of all, I want to say thank you to all of that because, I was never as athletic as your kids were. So I had to play from the neck up. I could never dunk a basketball, right? So I had to make sure I played smart on defense and things like that. So I had to play that way. But I appreciate it.
Yeah.
No, and I get that all the time about the politician thing. It's really it's a regularly occurring thing. And I get it from both sides, honestly, and it's cool that people see that. And my wife says it to me all the time, and I don't know, I'm undecided. It's just something that I'm passionate about,
Right.
I like it a lot, from the local level all the way up to what we talk about on social media, you and I.
And let's jump on this too, because knowing you, and you've been one who kind of expressed your political ideals at a very young age, and like me, and I'll tell everyone, I've we have a lot of similarities. Walt would know because he grew up with me, but for the video and the listening audience would know I've been a politico for about 40 years. So if you do the math, I was doing this and following politics since I was 10 to 12 years old. I go back to the Carter years and the Reagan years, and really took time to really study all the aspects of politics, and took time to learn all the ideology, and not necessarily subscribe to one. And I will say this about you, and then I think similar. I remember before you kind of evolved to your thinking, to where you're at right now. And we want to talk a little about that, because I would say, if I recall, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were more on the conservative side. Is that right? When you were growing up, so
Yeah.
tell us about your evolution, and what you saw, what you seen, and how you evolved in your ideology. And I know as a young man, you're still growing and developing it.
Mhm. Yeah. I grew up in a very conservative household. My dad was a very big Republican. Our household was so conservative that we actually went to Bill Clinton's impeachment. I was 5 or 6 years old, and I was at Bill Clinton's impeachment with my dad.
Wow.
So I grew up in a very conservative household. But nonetheless, he taught me about how government works, and I think that's the more important side. But I had that little conservative fleshing with it. So that was interesting for me to grow up and see one side of it and not really see the other side, because I didn't have another voice in my house. My mom kind of stayed out of it, so I didn't have another voice in my house. But I grew up like and the nerd in me is going to come out now, but you asked. I grew up, it was a regular thing that my dad and I would watch things like The West Wing. It's still one of my favorite shows. We used to watch JAG. We used to talk about politics when we were driving to practice. We'd even disagree about things back then. I was 7, 8, 9 years old, and we would disagree about things back then. And I had no idea what I was talking about. Some would say I still don't, which is fine. But no, so the change happened really when I went to college for my undergrad, because I grew up, and you know this, I grew up in a predominantly white school. Growing up in elementary school, we had, in our whole district, we had a handful of black people. I mean, that was it. And so to get the black perspective on current events and history on things, I'm not saying that our history teachers were wrong, but we were only being told one side, right? And I love my history teachers dearly to this day. My dad was on school board. I have a very close relationship with most of them. So I'm not saying that they were wrong. I don't want anybody to mistake that. But having said that, when I went to college and my black friends were able to correct me in the things that I was saying and saying, wait, you're only telling one side. Like, let's talk about when black people came back from World War II. They were still hated. When they came back from Vietnam, they were still hated, right? In World War II, there was still segregation, right? Like, just because you served in the war doesn't mean you come back and you're a completely free person, right? You still had to battle that, and even if you did, people still judged you. So I didn't have that perspective, and I had that ignorance about me because I didn't know, and I just thought I knew. So once I started to get perspectives and really tour the country and see things outside of where I grew up, some people would call it a brainwashing, but I think that's part of experiencing things is learning how different people can be, and not in a bad way, but just learning how different people can live, or the opinions that people have, or how people are treated. So stepping outside of my small town, and seeing that firsthand, it really played a factor in how I think now. And I still have some conservative views, I would say. My liberal friends would say that I'm not completely liberal because I differ in some opinions, but that's kind of the roadmap of how I got here. And now to see the way that people are treated. Like I said, I like to view myself as a community warrior, and I like to hold people to a high standard at the lowest of levels, because that's where change happens first. You can't change much, even at the federal level. You have to change things locally first to have an impact for resounding change.
It's interesting too when we talk about liberal, conservative, and things like that. I actually still consider myself conservative, and I brought in on a lot of the ideals of true conservatives. And people looking, what do you mean you're so anti-Trump? Well, Trump's not a conservative. And I'll say that 1,000 times over and over. I don't see anything conservative about this current administration, and quite frankly, the current state of the Republican Party. It was hijacked. I'll say in fairness to you, when you were when you were kind of like in that lane of conservatism, it was still somewhat, you saw conservatism still being practiced, and the ideology of conservative being practiced and having some success with it, even though we didn't agree with all their moves.
Sure.
We saw some of the success that was happening with it, the family values, and that's gone. The moral pieces, that's gone. So a lot of things have gone out of the out of the window. And even now we go into COVID-19. I'm going to say even the pro-life issue has gone. And we saw the conservative movement lost one of the leaders today, Mr. Herman Cain. God rest his soul as well. But again, his behavior was reckless. Going into a rally where all the public health experts, all the scientists, um, you know, all anyone who had any type of sense of or concern about the well-being of the whole public, were against, this, said the way that we defeat this COVID-19 coronavirus is to smother it. How do you smother it? Through social distancing, through hygiene, using proper hygiene, wearing masks, things like that, having pretty much respect for other people's lives. And now, we're at 4.5 million cases in America. We're at 152,000 American lives lost. Talk to me a little bit about that, Cody. And now they're saying we want the kids to go back to school. What's going on?
So one of my favorite cliches in life is it starts at the top, and I think that's a big statement for any organization, not just what we're talking about right now. But for the sake of this conversation, I'll keep it at that. I saw today on the news there was a Republican Republican congressman. I can't remember if he was a senator or if he was a representative, but either way, he tested positive for COVID, and he still questions wearing a mask. And so I don't want to say I'm blaming Republicans, because I know people, even as much as people dislike Mitch McConnell is wearing a mask, and he's encouraging people to wear a mask. Pat Toomey, he's the same way. He's encouraging people to wear masks. And that's the kind of leadership I think we need, to not defer to scientists and doctors in this situation and pretend that we know more is dangerous. It's reckless. And I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor, but I know how to read journals, medical journals. I know how to read, and I know how to listen to people. So if you tell me that through your studies, through your medical research that I don't know how to do, through your scientific research that I don't know how to do, you're telling me that this is the best option, and by the way, this is the same way around the globe. I think we should defer to the scientists and the doctors here and really take heed in what they're saying. And not make it a political thing, which is what it has turned into on both sides. I don't think that either side has had a great voice in leadership through all of this, and I'm not really sure why that is. But I really just wish that the people at the top would work together instead of against each other and say, hey, we really need to come up with a solution here. Because we know the doctors are telling us we know how to squash this until we have a vaccine. So let's do that. Let's practice that. But that's not what's being done right now. I can't wrap my head around why. But we're getting into dangerous times now again, where we're seeing, I don't know if it's a second wave, I don't know if we can really call it that, or an increase in cases in states like Texas and Arizona and Florida, those places. And we know why, we know why, but I just don't understand why we can't see that the answers that have been given to us, we don't take heed in those. We think we know better, and I don't understand why.
Your representative, I think his name is Louis Goldman out of Texas, was the congressman who recently tested positive. On top of, I believe, the national security.
Yes, the national security advisor to Trump.
National security advisor also tested positive. So the wave is certainly hitting the GOP right now, and I believe that we have. We're seeing some concerns right now, and I believe, especially with the economy, I don't know if you guys saw the numbers today, but the economy again shrunk 33%. 2 million more jobless claims hit the rolls. So right now we're looking at a very sick country right now, and we're looking at I'm just going to use street terms. We're sick and broke right now, and we're heading into a slippery slope. But Walt, I know you and I have talked a lot about this. I think there's some implications on this with the elections coming up. And I know you saw earlier today that Trump is calling for a delay in the elections. What are we seeing right now? You put out a tweet. Are we looking at a coup right now? What's going on, Walt?
I mean, it's definitely a demoralizing state of affairs right now. And just piggybacking off something Cody had said earlier in his comments in regards to politicizing, and I like to add on to that also weaponizing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have individuals now embarking on a journey that should have been started at the inception of finding out about the epidemic. Straight closures, finding out a pandemic plan, finding out if the previous administration had things set up to move forward to take care of these things. But now they're like playing behind the 8 ball. And it's a detriment to society, because now, like you just said, we have kids that's going to probably go back to school in September with no precautions and nothing set up. That's going to put a lot of these kids at risk. So now are you saying you're willing to let these kids die at the expense of a vote? At the sake of reopening businesses and reopening the economy at the leisure of a few. I mean, we have to play this thing out like smart, and we don't want to make it too big of a deal than it may become, because Fauci already indicated that the second wave is on its way. So we definitely have to be precautious, and we have to definitely take some type of steps to, save the kids and anybody else in the way. And just to get a take off Cody, how do you feel that from privatized to urban schools, they were looking at opening the urban schools previous to the private schools?
So I'm gonna take an overall approach to that, Walt, if you don't mind. So I think that there's way too much data right now that's all over the place, that shows us how kids, they contract this illness, how they spread it, how secondary transmission works. So I think that in any capacity, if you're in an area that's not a hot spot and you can follow the data that shows that your cases are downward trending, your curve is still flattening, I think that you can decide at a local level you can return to school. However, to predicate your return to school in person on funding it's completely wrong, especially because and this was from Fox News. Public schools only get 8% of their funds from the federal government. So that's not enough of a reward to risk your staff and your students and their families' lives to reopen, in my opinion. And so there was just NBC News put out a medical report tonight that said that children under 5 are actually more likely to spread COVID than 5 through 17. And that kind of contradicts other studies that have been done in other countries, where 1 in 10 will actually transmit secondary spread, or out of 40 households, only 8%, and we say only, but only 8% of those kids will spread it to their households. So in my mind, 8% is too much, because the concern, Walt, it hasn't been that the kids are going to get sick and die, because numbers are showing that young people are most likely not, even if they have symptoms, they're most likely not going to die. The problem is, if we send people back to school, we're creating a bubble of unnecessary transmission, where we have built virtual learning systems over the past 6 months, and we continue every day to see that schools are working at their hardest. Teachers are working the hardest they've ever worked in their entire careers that I've talked to, because they have to create new systems now, and they're trying to perfect it because they care about their students. So to create a space where people who don't have access to tests, I want to create a scenario. So we saw this past week what happened with the Marlins, the Miami Marlins.
Right.
So the only reason that we know that happened is because they had access to tests. Most schools will not have access to testing. So you're now sending students and staff to a school that have not been tested unless they've been sick and been sent by their doctor, and you don't know who has it, because some people are asymptomatic. So now you're creating a space where people are transmitting it and spreading this virus without you knowing it until somebody gets sick. And when a staff member who is in a vulnerable population to begin with, whether it's age or they have a pre-existing condition, whatever the case may be, when a staff member gets sick, or even worse, God forbid, a staff member dies, you won't have to worry about planning for schools, because staff won't want to come to work.
That's right.
So I think that in the broader scheme of things, and I said this to my wife today, I saw the U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, she said today that there is no national plan for reopening schools because there is no federal superintendent. Those were her words. And I just find that so outrageous, because we're telling people that you won't get your 8% of federal funding unless you reopen your school and kids are back in schools. Now, let me also say about this that I understand the importance of sending students back to school. I understand what it means. Students have to be in schools, because some of them are better learners in person. Some of them need that social interaction. We need to make sure sometimes schools are providing their only meal of the day, which schools have continued to feed kids throughout all of this. And a lot of times teachers or staff members are the ones that see the abuse that happens in the home. So I understand all of those things, and I think it's important. And educational research has shown that K through 5 students are the most important students to get back into schools first. because they need to learn their phonics. They need to have hands-on learning. They don't have as great of social skills typically as middle schoolers and high schoolers, secondary students. So I understand that. But until we finitely know what kids can do, as far as spreading this disease and potentially hurting our staff and our administrators, I think we need to press pause, even if it's only for a few weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I think a reset button is definitely in order. And unfortunately, we may be a little late. I think the later we get into, well, excuse me, I'm not gonna say it's never too late,
Mhm.
but it becomes a lot more
The
difficult.
response is late. The
Yeah,
response is late. Right.
exactly. And it gets a lot more difficult. I think in March, when we thought we were going to go into a national emergency, and that just never happened. We were looking at maybe about a 30-day shutdown. And at that time, I believe the average age of the cases and the deaths were around 55, 50. The old fogies like me were. But
Wait till
now,
you get my age, Rob.
now it's down. Now it's down to I think I heard the age of 34, which now you're in a whole another demographic, and that's going to be a lot harder to contain because I know when I was 34 years old, trying to tell someone now to stay sheltered in place, especially now in the summertime, we're going to go 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 go. We want to continue to see our friends, see our families, and we feel invincible. And the tricky thing about this virus is, to your point, if you're asymptomatic, you could be carrying it and not even know it, and then boom, you done affected 5 people, and unfortunately, maybe one or two out of those 5 could be fatal.
Yeah. The
So
Marlins are up to 17. The
it,
Marlins are up to 17 cases.
yeah, 17, and I think it's just unbelievable.
And that's not in a school where there's
Right.
hundreds of people, even on a hybrid day.
And I,
Okay.
and
So,
I I watch baseball, and I actually said to my wife, I said, they're doing, before the information came out about it, I said, man, baseball's actually doing the right thing. It's a basically a non-contact sport. There was no fans in there. I mean, they were, taking the rosin bags off. I mean, they were taking all the precautions, and voila, boom. We heard 12, then we heard 14. Now it's up to 17,
mhm.
and who knows? Who else? Who on the Phillies?
The Phillies have 2 positive cases
Oh,
now.
the Phillies have 2 now. Okay,
Yes,
so now
as of tonight.
19 out of that. I mean, so how is that part of it? I'm talking about the business of baseball. How is that going to be, sustainable? And then you had, the president up and saying, oh, kids are immune to this, so they can go back to school. But I'm like, dude, you're not thinking this all the way through. Well,
Yeah.
and the way you presented it so eloquently, Cody, you got to think beyond that with this virus. It's not about just a kid just goes to school, catches the flu. No, when you're catching this COVID-19, they could come home. They still have to come home to their parents. And if they catch it, they're going to affect their whole families, or they're going, like you said, affect the teacher. So, I mean, we're dealing with, and I'm just going to come out and say this, and this is the leader of the free world standing behind the presidential seal, making these bogus claims. And right now, we have to wait until January the 20th to make a regime change. uh, every day is critical. We're losing 2,000 Americans a day. I don't think people understand what's going on, and the impact of this leaders, as you mentioned earlier, about how it is from the national leadership. And right now the polls, he's polling terribly. I think he's down to Joe Biden in many polls. I think by 10 to 12 points, double digits. Of course, today wasn't a good day, so we'll watch the polls. I normally I encourage everyone else to go to 538.com because they take a number of the polls, and they give an average of where the numbers are, and they give you a good feel. And generally, they're accurate to take a temperature. But I would think probably by next week we could kind of see where the impact of this week, which everyone will admit, including Republicans, will say was not a good week for the president.
Yeah.
So are we getting, and I'll just say this to you and ask you, Cody, do you think we're getting into resignation territory? What's your thoughts?
Oh man, I'm not even close enough to that administration to understand I think there have been a lot of points in this administration where we thought, any other president would probably have been close to a resignation, but I don't think so. The closest thing that I've read, and you've probably read this too, is that at one point President Trump was polling so badly that the RNC was actually considering a different candidate. Because President Trump was frustrated with his campaign as well, which I believe is why he hired a new campaign manager. So we will see what happens. I think it's too late in the game now to even talk about resignation, because for the GOP that would be more than likely an automatic win for the Democrats. Which I just want somebody in there who is going to lead us and sound presidential and not deny things that are so blatantly obvious. And I think that we just need to understand our choices in this next election as we come up. This isn't a time to make a statement with your vote for change. You're free to vote for who you want, and I support that 100%. I don't want to silence anybody's voice or vote. But we saw what happened in 2016 when Democrats decided to make a vote for change for someone who couldn't win. So I just want people to be mindful of that as you go to the polling place and understand how the Electoral College works and understand how general elections work and things like that. So just know what you're going to do before you go to the polling place.
Exactly. Well, just want to first of all thank you, Cody, for joining us today on the All In Network. And I just want to tell the folks, the All In Network is growing. We have lots of content, lots of great content for you. We have our sports show with Elijah and Mike. Go to our YouTube channel on All In Network. On the YouTube channel, and you'll find all the content that you like. They're doing a phenomenal breakdown on the NBA, which is starting tonight. So some exciting things like that. Hopefully, everything will go well in the bubble. Of course, we have All in Politics. We have Rain and Bliss show, which so these young ladies are doing an outstanding job giving you, some great content on pop culture and things from a women's perspective, and also Real Deal with Cody Deal, who joined the network last week with us. So a lot of exciting content, and we just want to continue to bring the voice, give that voice to the voiceless. Walt, any final pieces before we?
Like I said, just like to thank Cody again. Very insightful and inventive stuff that he brought to the table. And
Thanks,
look forward to probably bringing him back again, man. Like I said, it's really intriguing, man. A lot of things that we could have added in that we can probably save for the next one, because
we didn't get to anything on the schedule, did we?
yeah, we just hey, look.
Yeah, you got to come
Anytime you
back.
have a good conversation,
I'll be back.
You can't warm it,
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited already.
All right.
Definitely appreciate you.
Hey, thank you for having me on, fellas. I really appreciate it. This was great.
All right. All In Network. You take care. Peace.
Peace.